Welcome to the Dr. Tim Jennings Show, where we seek real answers to life's real problems. I'm your host, Dr. Tim Jennings, here with my co-host, Lori Atkins.
Hi, thanks for joining us today. Today we're going to be discussing a difficult topic, a serious topic. It's one that's common but rarely gets discussed, probably because it is such a tough subject, and that is recovering from sexual abuse. Dr. Jennings, how common is sexual abuse today?
You know, the data shows that 1 out of every 4 women and 1 out of every 6 men will suffer some form of sexual assault or abuse in their lifetime. And 60% of those assaults occur in their own home or the home of a family member or friend or neighbor.
Wow. And I mean, is this typically just a secular issue? Is this a problem just in non-Christian homes, or are Christian homes equally affected?
Yeah, the sad reality is that the data shows there's no difference in sexual abuse or exploitation in Christian homes versus non-Christian homes.
That seems so strange. I mean, I don't understand how that could be. Do you have any ideas why that's
Yeah,
the
so your mind is going, how could it be that people who proclaim Jesus Christ as their Savior and want to be like Christ have the same rate of abusing their children as people who don't believe in God or believe in Christ? How can that possibly be? One of the things that I put forth in my various books is that the reason for that is much of Christianity has become religious rather than transformational. What I mean by religious, it's based on a system of rules and imposed type law constructs where people seek to get legal accounting for misdeeds done. They view God as a authoritarian rule giver who must police breaches in his rules. And thus the sin problem becomes a very legal transaction type of approach.
Right.
What the data shows is if you have a religion in which the sin problem is a legal problem with a legal transaction, there really is no genuine life transformation. And that's how the world works. The world as we live works on this legal law construct. That's how the governments of the world work. And so when you have a religion that presents God functioning like the governments of the world, where he's got a system of laws, and if you break his laws, then he keeps record of misdeeds, and then he punishes law breakers, and you got to get somebody to pay penalties for that. When you get that whole kind of thing going, there's no transformation, and thus you end up abusing your family in the same rate. When you come back to what the New Testament teaches, what the Bible teaches, that God is like Jesus revealed, and you have this inner experience with a divine being who is love and other-centered, then you have transformation, your motives change, and you actually have less exploitation and less abuse. But that's only when you come back to a God who's love and who's built his universe to operate in harmony with the protocols of love.
That makes perfect sense. So tell us what literally happens to a person when they are sexually abused.
So a lot of things happen, and of course the first thing is it does depend on what age a person is. So I think everybody can kind of get a child will have a different consequence than an adult, okay? From, say, an assault, a rape, an exploitation of some sort. The younger the person, the more devastating and damaging it frequently is, depending, of course, on the extent of the exploitation and the abuse.
Right.
So with that in mind, children who are exploited in their own home, the most devastating then would be the closer the person is to them. So it's more damaging if it's from a parent or a grandparent, somebody very close, than it is, say, from a neighbor, even though it's still damaging from a neighbor. It's much more damaging when it's from a trusted relationship. Okay? And so what happens in those circumstances is it will alter the thinking processes. It will alter relational expectations. It will alter belief systems about self. And it will alter brain wiring and circuitry. When exploitation happens at any age, we have a normal response to become very stressed, very fearful, very anxious. And so the brain's alarm circuitry will fire because this is a potential threat. This is uncomfortable. We don't like this. Okay, so as in children in which this is ongoing, they develop a sense of anxiety, apprehension, fearfulness, which impairs other healthy brain development like reasoning, thinking, higher cortex, and they grow up in a home in which they are don't feel safe, and this leads to upregulation of stress circuits which activate immune system. And so the data shows kids who have grown up in homes in which there was exploitation, because of this they have more health problems later in life, they have more mental health problems later in life, they have more alcohol and drug problems later in life, and they have more suicide attempts later in life than people who weren't abused. So it's real devastating across the whole landscape of human experience.
Which makes sense, again, because our brains are neuroplastic and they do physically change based on the experiences and the environment that we're in. But it still seems like there's a disparity. Like some people, it seems like they have tremendous problems later in life, and yet others seem to be able to compartmentalize it or manage it better and don't end up having those serious problems. Why is there such disparity?
Again, for the wide variety of reasons. One, let's start with the biological. We are, while we all are physical human beings, we have differences genetically. And what we've discovered is, depending on the gene constellations you have, different gene constellations make one more vulnerable to having post-traumatic consequences more severely than others. Some have more resilience. One specific gene that's been identified is the gene that codes for the reuptake pump for the neurotransmitter called serotonin. Many people have heard of serotonin because many of the common antidepressants like the Prozacs and the Zolofts work on the serotonin system.
Right.
And when one neuron talks to another neuron, it releases a neurotransmitter, in this case we're talking serotonin, into a little gap between the neurons called a synapse. And then the neuron that releases the neurotransmitter has little reuptake pumps, like vacuum cleaner, that will suck that neurotransmitter back up, repackaged for the next time. In the human genome, there are two versions of the gene that codes for those pumps, a long-arm version and a short-arm version. And when they first discovered this, they discovered that the people with the short-arm version had higher rates of depression than people with the long-arm versions. They said, oh, there's a gene that codes for depression. But then they dug a little deeper and they discovered, well, no, the gene doesn't actually code for depression. What the short-arm version codes for is sensitivity to one's environment. So if you have a short-arm version gene for that transporter, and you're raised in a home in which there's abuse, neglect, exploitation of some kind, then you have higher rates of depression later in life. But if you're raised in a home and you have that short-arm version, and you're raised in a home that's nurturing, loving, supportive, healthy, you not only have less depression later in life than the people with the long-arm version, you actually were more likely to become a leader in society.
Wow.
So the gene doesn't code for depression. It codes to sensitivity to the environment. So those kids with that particular gene are much more sensitive and react more severely to the abuse, and that causes their mental health problems, that one gene. There are other genes that have been identified in a similar way that will actually, if you have one version of the other version of the gene and you have abuse, then you will have a higher rate of negative consequences later because of your genetics. One variable that causes people to have different outcomes is the genetics you have.
Sure.
Other variable, though, are the support systems in your environment. When the abuse comes out, do you have a supportive family that rallies around you, supports you, validates you, helps work through the problem? Do you have a family that actually colludes with the abuse? Or do you have a family that denies or ridicules or is the source of the abuse? So that's a part of it. And then one's overall belief systems that one holds about what it all means to you. This is very critical. It's not just the event itself.
Right.
Okay, what happened? Uncle did something to me on my 6th birthday. Okay, what does that mean? How does that get internalized? What are the conclusions there? Well, that means that I'm ugly. That means that I'm gross. That means that I'm nasty. And so it's the meaning that's internalized, and that meaning then may be reinforced by unhealthy family, or it may be refuted by a healthy family, helped you work through it.
Right.
So it depends on the environment in which we were raised in the aftermath of the abuse as well.
So lots of variables there. Dr. Jennings, you give a lecture on this topic, and in that lecture you actually ask the audience what's worse than rape or molestation, which I have trouble imagining anything worse than rape or molestation. What would be worse?
And this is when I ask the question to the audience really kind of looks at me like, what? Can there really be anything worse than that? And dealing with my patients, what I've discovered for most of them is worse than the actual abuse event itself is the betrayal of somebody they trusted. So if the abuse happened by a parent or a grandparent, or perhaps the abuse happened by a stepfather, and they went to the mother, and the mother didn't believe them.
Right.
Or the mother not only didn't believe them, but maybe colluded and participated and didn't protect them. So they had the trauma of the abuse of the stepfather, but what actually hurt them more deeply was the fact that they expected mother to believe and protect, and mother betrayed instead. Yes. And that was a devastating, much more deeply hurtful thing than the act of the exploitation itself for many people. Okay?
Understood.
And that act of betrayal, many struggle to get over. And we have to work through that in therapy.
So is there hope for people who have experienced abuse?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things people need to understand is that your brain is in a state of flux. That no matter where you find yourself today, you are still changeable.
Okay.
You can change your brain circuitry, your brain wiring, but not only that, you can change your beliefs, your understanding, your insight, your perspectives. Just like you can learn something new. You could learn a new language.
Yes.
You could learn to play an instrument. It's pretty much at any age. That's evidence of your brain's capacity to update, assimilate. And when you learn new things, whether it's something like a language or playing an instrument, your brain rewires new pathways for that ability. Likewise, while we can't change history, history's over, you can't go
Right.
back and redo it. And one of the problems with many patients that I see is that they so much want their history to be different. They don't
yes.
want to have that history. They don't want to have that childhood. And they struggle in their mind to somehow get it to be different.
Yeah.
And so one of the things they have to accept is, you know what? I can't change history. History can't change. The facts of history are set. However, what can change is how I relate to that history, how I feel about that history, how I understand that history, the meaning I derive from that history. And so my internal state today in relation to that history can change. I can change, but the history doesn't change.
Makes sense. So is there something that's more effective for treating victims of sexual abuse? Is therapy more effective? Is medicine more effective? Are they about equal?
Well, this is an exciting question because historically, up until just recent times, there really hasn't been any effective medications for trauma resolution. There are medications that help with some of the symptomology, maybe help with the depressive symptoms, help with the sleep symptoms, help with the anxiety symptoms, but the actual core trauma stuff, medicines haven't really been able to impact significantly. And so, foundationally, the core treatment to resolving trauma is going to be psychotherapy, some type of working through and the storyline, the internal dialogue, the understanding, the meaning, and how you relate to that history. It's the therapy piece that is much more critical to the healing than the medicine piece itself. The sad part is, though, that so many people would rather just take medicine than do the hard work of the therapy. But what I was saying is exciting is that there is coming out in the research now, a new medicine that has been shown to be effective in conjunction with therapy that seems to neurochemically enhance the brain's ability to rapidly make the changes necessary when the therapy is happening. So it's not, medicine by itself won't do anything, but the medicine with the therapy makes the brain more pliable, the changes are more quick, the resolution and working through within actually some data and some studies are showing with this medicine in conjunction with intensive therapy of 2 or 3 days can actually mark change that persists for months. Okay?
Wow.
So there's really exciting, but still the core is the therapy piece.
And it's understandable why people would want to avoid that. I'm guessing that's a reason why so few people that have experienced trauma don't get help.
And we will pick this up right after our break.
Okay. Hi, welcome back to the Dr. Tim Jennings Show. Today we're discussing the difficult topic of recovering from sexual abuse. We've been talking about some of the impacts on folks who have experienced this trauma, but we've also been talking about some exciting revelations and innovations in treatments, and there's some exciting news that people who've experienced this trauma can actually be helped by therapy and by medicine. So if that's possible, Dr. Jennings, tell us why so many people who've experienced this trauma don't get help.
So let me clarify again what is shown to be effective. The key thing to recovering from trauma abuses is the therapy piece. So medicines historically are, I guess metaphorically, if you had a broken leg, okay, and they gave you crutches. Crutches would be very helpful. It gives you support, help you get around, take the pressure off, but they don't fix anything.
Right.
Historically, medicines have kind of worked like crutches. They give some emotional support. You don't feel as unstable. You can sleep better, but it really doesn't fix the underlying problem. And that's where medicines historically have been. What I was suggesting is that their research is showing that a new medicine, in conjunction with therapy, allows the brain to process the trauma and reconnect pathways that calm the stress circuitry to bring resolution faster. But it's not the medicine bringing the healing. The medicine is enhancing the brain's pliability so that people can do the therapeutic work more quickly. So the therapeutic work is still the key. And so then the question, well, okay, well, if this is all good and people can get help, people can change, they're not stuck, well, why do so many people not get help? There's a truism that, and the reason is because it's painful.
Very.
That's the reason. It's painful. And many people don't want to revisit those memories.
Which is understandable.
They don't want to dig into that emotional wound. They don't want to feel those feelings again. And so they spend a lot of energy trying to avoid, trying to not think about it, trying to avoid reminders, trying to not feel those horrible feelings of helplessness, of hurt, of exploitation, of betrayal, of panic. They don't want to go through that in their own experience again. And so they will often do many things to avoid, whether it's alcohol, drugs, jumping from relationship to relationship, busyness in work, just frantic this, that, and the other, just to try. But there's a truism people need to know. And audience, I'm going to tell you, there's a truism. Once there is brokenness of any kind, there are no pain-free options. See, Lori, let's say you have a broken leg. Once it's broken, somebody comes to set the bone, but you say, oh no, it's going to hurt, so you don't let them touch it. Don't touch it. If they never do anything to it, do you avoid pain, or are you still in pain?
Not at all.
And you stay in pain and you stay disabled. But they put it in a splint. Then you go to an orthopedic surgeon, and then you go to physical therapy. Do you avoid pain?
Not at all.
No, you don't avoid pain. There's lots of pain. But that pathway brings healing. Once there is brokenness, there are no pain-free options. The problem with people who've been traumatized is most of the time, many of them fall into the trap of making decisions that, here's the decision tree. What's going to hurt me the least right now? And they're in pain avoidance mode.
Yes.
Pain avoidance mode results in avoiding healing. And so I have to help my patients understand, you can't avoid pain. Your only options are, am I making decisions that are bringing healing or not? That's it. And so you have to step back and say, okay, what do I need to do to heal the wound?
Right.
But it's going to be painful.
Which is profound.
It is a wake-up call to so many people, because they're reflexively taught that, well, maybe if I avoid let's avoid things that hurt. Well, this hurts, I don't want to deal with it. But no, once there's a brokenness here. You've been injured, you've been wounded.
Right.
The only way to heal that now is to deal with it, but it's going to be painful. So you have to come to that mindset. Okay, I've been suffering, and when I deal with my patients in my office, and I bring this to them, they actually calm down because they know they've been hurting and suffering for years. And they've been running from it for years, but they haven't been avoiding it at all. They've been suffering for years.
Right.
And when I put this to them and they realize, you're right, I've been suffering, I've been hurting, I've been avoiding pain, I've only been avoiding wellness. And then they make the decision, okay, I'm going to stand my ground and no longer run. Stand my ground and face it.
And know that there's going to be benefit from that pain.
Yes, it may hurt, but I'm going to work through it. And when they make that decision, healing process begins, and they often feel less frantic. It doesn't mean they don't hurt less, but they're less panicky because now they realize they're on a process.
They have a plan.
A plan that's going to bring healing. That's right.
Yeah. So what is your preferred treatment approach for those who have experienced trauma such as sexual abuse?
So my preferred approach is you have to start with a therapeutic alliance. The victim, the person who's been traumatized, has to find a therapist that they trust. And that therapist has to have the experience and knowledge base to be able to be helpful. Sometimes I've had patients come see me that maybe were with a counselor that they trusted, but the counselor doesn't really have much experience. Sometimes they go to a pastoral counselor, and the pastoral counselor is very compassionate and caring, but doesn't really know how to deal with the trauma issues.
Just not equipped.
Yeah. So you have to have a therapeutic alliance with somebody you trust, and that therapist then needs to have experience in dealing with helping resolve trauma issues. And then in that context, there needs to be a working through these issues where the person can reprocess. Can't change history. History's over.
Yes.
But we can change the understanding and our internal relationship to that. And there's a whole lot of things that have to be worked through in the healing process.
So can you give us some examples of how you might help someone reprocess a traumatic event or a traumatic past?
Yeah, I'm going to give you some examples here. And I do want to say there's a place for medicine, and I think as the new research comes out, the medicine, there probably is going to be developed a protocol for trauma issues where people may go somewhere for 3 to 5 days. And a 3 to 5 day intensive, they may actually resolve many of the trauma issues that have long-term consequence. We're on the verge of developing a protocol like this. I'm very excited to see where that's going. But currently, yes, what I have to tell people to do is kids particularly, and the younger you are, the more deeply distorted your understanding of the events become. Okay. So I give them an analogy. Imagine looking out the window into a parking lot. You see a 40-year-old man cursing at a 5-year-old little girl, calling her every foul name you've ever heard. Do you look out at that and go, "What a horrible little girl"?
No.
Not for
never.
a second. I said, who do you learn about as you observe that? Who are you learning about? The man. You're learning about the man.
Yes.
He's revealing he's got issues. But what's the little girl walk away feeling like?
Nothing.
I said, you're the little girl. You see, when kids get abused, they're in the position of being exploited. But if you walked in today as an adult on any adult abusing a kid, do you think, what a horrible little kid? Not for a second. You recognize immediately the defect, the corruption is in the abuser, not in the child. The child is an innocent.
Right.
However, the child in their child mind can't process that. And so the children always walk away with a sense of, there's something wrong with me.
Yes.
I'm broken, I'm ugly, I'm no good, I'm not
fault.
deserving, it's my fault, exactly. And so the first step is to get them to understand, hey, wait a second, my internalization of this is not correct.
The perspective was wrong.
Yeah. And then I give them what I call the filing cabinet analogy. Okay. Facts of history. So filing cabinet, you have these little manila folders, and in the folders you have pieces of paper.
Sure.
Okay. The pieces of paper represent facts of history.
Okay.
Fact of history, 6th birthday, uncle abused me. That's a fact. That fact cannot change.
Right.
The question, though, is where did that fact get filed in your heart and mind? And where it gets filed, it got filed under the file of I'm gross, I'm ugly, I'm nasty, I'm disgusting, I'm no good, I'm defiled. That's where it gets filed. Okay? We can't change history.
Right.
But we can open the file and say, wait a second. And we can reprocess and say, wait a minute, if I walked in today and saw my uncle molesting my child, would I think my child is gross and my child is nasty? No, I would think my uncle is a pervert.
Yes.
Okay? And so while you can't change history, you can say, wait a minute, what did it mean when that happened to me? It didn't mean this. It meant this.
Yes.
And you can change the meaning. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier in the show, that it's not just the event or the trauma itself, it's the meaning that people derive from
And
the
attach
event.
to it.
Exactly. And then I give the example of the cow pasture analogy.
Tell us about that one.
And so I asked my audience, said, you ever anybody know what a cow pasture is? Anybody know what a cow pie is? Okay. For our city people, a cow pie is what the cow leaves behind, the little waste product behind it there. And imagine walking through a cow pasture and you slip and fall in a cow pie.
Yeah.
And it gets in your face. And would that be a gross and disgusting
It can
experience?
happen, yes. That would be gross and disgusting.
And so let's say it happened when you were 10. And when you went home and you showered and you 10 bottles of Listerine later,
Right.
you're gargled, okay? Now, today, as you're sitting here, if that happened to you were 10, was that a gross experience?
Of course.
And as you remember it, do you remember how gross it was?
Yes.
Does that mean you're a gross person today because of it?
No.
Are you telling me you can go through a gross and disgusting experience and not be a gross and disgusting person? See, people who've been abused don't get that.
Right.
And the reason they don't get that, here's why. Because when the abuse is happening, it feels gross.
Mm-hmm.
It feels disgusting. And those feelings at the time get attached to the self.
Yes.
Okay? And so as they're reprocessing this, and so because it feels gross, I'm disgusting. That's how I feel. I feel about me now. But you're reprocessing this and opening those files. Given the cow pasture analogy, they recognize, wait a minute, yeah, that would have been gross, but I wouldn't have been gross. So all those feelings, remember how gross it felt? They are appropriate to the event.
Yes, to what was
That
happening
was
to
gross.
them.
That was disgusting. They're not appropriate to the self. And so you have to take all those gross feelings and refile them to the experience and separate them from the self. This is one of the things that has to happen. And many of my patients, as they get that, there's an epiphany. A light goes on.
Of course.
And they see that and they see hope. They might even say, I get it.
Yes.
And then they walk out. Does that mean it's all done?
No.
No. And the reason it's not all done is because even though they may understand the truth now, the brain takes time to rewire. And so they have, for many years, habituated certain reactions, certain automated pathways, certain ways of reacting, certain ways of feeling.
Yeah.
And so I give them the other analogy, we're now changing habit. Now they see the truth, they have a habit pattern they have to change, habit of reacting. And if you, you brush your teeth, your teeth with a certain habit, start the same side of your
Yes.
mouth, go through the same way every time. If you were to say, I'm going to start the other side tonight. Well, tonight when you got home, you probably forget and do the other way. And when you got in bed, you go, oh, I was supposed to do it the other way. Do you go, I'm stupid, I can't change, I can't, or you recognize, no, I wasn't thinking, it was a habit. So people, as they recognize the truth, and then they find themselves in the middle of the old way of reacting,
Yes.
they don't go, why am I even going to therapy? Why am I even trying this? I can't change. They go, wait, that's an old habit. I wasn't thinking at the moment. Now's the time. If you want to make the change on the toothbrushing, you got to get up and you got to go brush your teeth again.
And be intentional about
And
it.
be intentional. So now you have to, you know what, I did react the old way, but you know what, this is the truth. And now you reprocess it again the new way. And you do this repetitively, and over time, the brain will make new pathways. The old pathways will be pruned back, and the trauma issues, facts of history don't change, but your sense of self, your view of yourself, your emotional reaction to these events, these will change over time.
Wow, this has been a very difficult topic, but you have given us some real hope. So if anyone is watching and has experienced trauma from sexual abuse, please get some help. If you want more information, want to see more of our shows, please visit our website at timjenningsmd.com.